Tech Forum. Okay, it's being recorded. The IBBC Tech Forum, we are broadcasting from the Address Hotel in Dubai, and we have a number of people who are actually on the panel live here. Plus, we have a number of people who are logged in from various locations around the world. So I'd like to thank all the panelists. We're going to start in a minute with Padraig Hanley, who is the editor at the Iraq Business News. And just to say that the subject today is around data and how it can benefit governments, citizens, businesses, and economies. So that's a broad theme. We're not going to go into too much detail, but we're looking at the top line benefits. In particular, the first half will be looking at different sectors and how people are using data generally to digitize, and with particular reference to Iraq if possible. And in the second panel, we'll be looking at much more detail of more like case studies from independent sectors, for example, like agriculture or smart cities. But just to start off now, thank you all for logging in. We're actually at the IBBC Iraq conference, which is in Dubai. And we have another panel on energy going on in the next room with about 200 attendees. But very pleased to have you all on from wherever you are across the globe. So if I could start off with Padraig Hanley, who's the, as I say, the editor and runs the Iraq Business News, which for anyone's information has a database of about 23,000 people that he regularly communicates with, and is a terrific resource for businesses to communicate what they're doing. So Padraig, over to you. If I'd like to hear how you view Iraq and where it is on the data continuum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I think it's important to emphasize at the start that, contrary to popular opinion, data is not boring, and it's not just something for nerds like me. Data, as the saying goes, is the new oil. It's an essential resource that decision makers in the public sector and the private sector all need access to, and that's as true in Iraq as anywhere else. So to get an idea of where Iraq is regarding data, I think the best place to start is with the World Bank's statistical capacity indicator. And that's a measure of the quality and the quantity of the economic statistics produced by governments. I've prepared a handout actually that includes a link to this, so Emma will be sharing that on the forum. But on this measure, Iraq scores 36.7 out of 100, which puts it right down at the bottom of the list. And I know Iraq has its challenges, and we can't expect to get the same sort of data from Iraq that we get from, let's say, from the UK's Office for National Statistics, for example. But according to the World Bank, I can get better data from the West Bank and Gaza. Let's say I can get better data from Afghanistan pre-Taliban than I can get from Iraq. So there's clearly a massive, there's got an opportunity to improve here. And on the plus side, I mean, what I see every day at Iraq Business News is that there are plenty of bright and educated Iraqis who can help to make that improvement happen. Now, one particular lever that we can pull, and that was identified by Ali Al-Molawi in a paper last year for Chatham House, where he proposed the idea of a new data analytics unit to improve evidence-based policymaking in Iraq, and in particular, to ensure that data was made available not just within government departments, but across government departments, and not kept in departmental silos as tends to happen at the moment. Now, I think it's also essential that we don't just share information between government departments, but also with the public, because the public are the ultimate owners of this information. And I think there's a danger that the information that people need to inform their decision-making is kept from them. So we need to ensure that the people close to the center of power don't get privileged access to this data and get an unfair competitive advantage from that. So, none of this is easy, but it's not rocket science. And before we start getting into the cool areas like artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on, I think we need to get the basics right. So we need to gather and publish the accurate and detailed data that we need for the everyday mundane decision making. And then we can also go and feed it into sophisticated AI algorithms or whatever else if that's what we need to do. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what the speakers have to say on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Padraig. That's really interesting. I think that levers in very well with what Christina's going to talk about, and possibly Raj as well later on. But for the moment, I'd like to introduce Sean O'Brien, who is the government lead on health and education for SAP. And he spoke to the conference earlier today about the digitization of Iraq, and I think he's got some very pertinent points to make today. Over to you, Sean. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate being in a hybrid Zoom call. So this is firstly. I mean, look, the data-driven government philosophy has been around for quite a while globally. And I think, you know, in markets or countries that are digitally transitioning, they're in a different point of maturity. And what we have found is where we see leaders, government leaders, looking at particular strategic problems in maybe it's health, maybe it's unemployment, maybe it's the economy, you know, wherever that may be, is then to start leveraging data much more effectively. And even if you're starting with spreadsheets and paper, the fact that you're actually using data to, you know, to make better decisions, evidence-based decisions, starts to build a momentum and a skill set in the organization. And this is what we see. You know, we have various data-driven projects here in the Emirates, you know, in across Africa, and obviously in other cities and other governments across the world. One thing that's changed, so sometimes people say, what has actually changed? Well, I think the pandemic has taught us the value of data. And it's taught us the value of data in relation to public health, into quick policy making by governments, in healthcare professionals, in terms of businesses. It's also taught us the value in relation to citizens making their decisions about certain things. You know, you look at the policy on social distancing, mask wearing, and looking at the data has driven government policy very, very quickly. And I think because governments, healthcare, businesses, and citizens, consumers have spent much more time looking at data, this has an indelible imprint on going forward. And when you look at it at the Gen Zs and the Gen As, how they use technology, how they view the world, you know, much more sustainable, net zero, much more conscious about our planet. They are going to change. They're going to use data to make choices about products, about services, about how they drive businesses to do things differently. And so data is becoming much more important on the things that matter. And I know when we talk about data purpose-driven, we often use this tale about purpose-driven, but the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas, and a broader section of the community, they really want organizations that have a broader purpose, a social purpose, social prosperity, to look at the wider impacts. And it's data that's going to help them make those choices. And this is why businesses are looking at net zero, the end-to-end value chain, and they're reshaping their thinking. This is why, you know, sustainability about energy consumption. And so the way I see it, that the pandemic has driven a much broader social purpose. This has a much stronger focus on the planet and sustainability. It has a much broader focus on social value, social prosperity, people, the small, medium enterprises, the social enterprises, how you measure an organization's overall view. And I think going forward, you know, it's this notion of social prosperity, where you look at the community, you look at the broader aspects of social value, the impact you have, local businesses, local economy, doing good. Data is going to help you make much more informed choices. And I think government's got a key role in incubating that and fostering that. Now, in relation to Iraq, you've got to start somewhere. And so I think it's always about a starting point. You start small, think big. You solve a strategic problem. This is what we've done with many other governments across the world. And by solving that problem with data, then you start building up more competency. And I think this is a key aspect.
Sean, fantastic. That was really interesting. So I'm already getting a very clear view that firstly, data isn't rocket science. Secondly, I think I heard you say that you've just got to start doing it and start doing, and then that drives a momentum in organizations and encourages people, and the capability comes. And the third thing really was about the impact is being driven by the young people who want it and making their decisions based on it. So could there be a danger that governments might get a bit left behind if everyone's on mobile phones and they're just making their own decisions?
Well, I think if you are a true consumer of data and you make life choices, well-being, healthcare, you make commercial choices about the companies you buy from, then your expectation is governments will have that same level or near to that level of service and using data. And I think government's often in a privileged position that it has access to much more data sources than any other commercial enterprise. And okay, we've got to respect data privacy, we've got to make sure we respect and we protect that data. But certainly from a healthcare point of view, you've seen a lot of focus on genomics of healthcare and treatment and how you shape outcomes for patients using data. And I think we're much more comfortable after the pandemic with data and the value it has than we started with. And I think this is a good thing for government. And like you say, you have to get, if you want to swim, you have to get wet. If you want to use data, you have to use it and start. And it won't be perfect and it won't be in the right place and it won't be all accurate. But if you can solve, we in the US, we had this challenge with one of our customers around child and infant mortality. And what they did is they put the data in the hands of the business and the professionals who identified the risk factors for young mothers. And they put a program in place to tackle those risk factors, which in the end tackled the problem. And so I think it's always got to be the strategic problems you try and tackle using data.
Thank you very much indeed. That's great. I'd like to come to Chris Ferguson now. Chris, if you're there. Chris Ferguson was formerly heading up GDS internationally, which is the British government digital service, which is world class, in fact. And Chris is now MD of Scott Logic. So Chris, if you'd like to come in, we'd like to hear from you about particularly with the government side of things, but also because you're in the private sector and the public sector, that confluence between the two.
Thank you, Ashley. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm speaking to you from sunny Edinburgh in Scotland today, where I'm based. So yes, as Ashley said, I was at the Government Digital Service in the UK government. I was there for a decade and helped oversee the UK's digital kind of services transformation, where at various points we topped like the OECD and the UN indices for digital government. All these things are relative, of course. And for the last 2 months, I love being described as private sector. Of my entire career of 23 years, I've spent precisely 2 months in the private sector, as long as we don't count me working at a restaurant while at university. So I have some perspective to share. But I'm interested already by what's being said, and this is why these conversations are always so superb. Data is the new oil, a phrase we've all heard, and Padraig, and it implies value. But I'd like to remind everybody that oil is an incredibly messy business. It's incredibly hard and difficult to refine that oil into useful and valuable products, right? And so, that, which is the bit no one ever says, after data's new oil. So the value's implied. So as government, yes, there is privilege there. Yes, there's a lot of data there, but boy, is it difficult. And I know this from having helped lead the digital kind of revolution in the UK government, and data and driving data-oriented outcomes and services is going to be just as hard and is going to be just as big a focus over the decade ahead. When you think about government, you've got to think about the governance, the strategy, the regulation, the laws, the skills you need to bring into government, and somehow integrate into existing capability and grade structures. Then there's the policies, and we haven't even started to talk about the technology and the architectures, the metrics. How are you going to measure this entirely new science and industry as you bring it in into our industry, which is hundreds of years old? So there's real challenges there, and it doesn't mean people aren't up for it. They absolutely are inside the UK government. And as we've just mentioned, the pandemic gave us a few of our probably best and proudest moments when it comes to data-oriented delivery. And the one I'll use very quickly as a 30-second case study is the clinically extremely vulnerable people service. And what that was in the UK, when we realized we were going to lock down in March 2020, we had to stand up in a matter of days, a capability that would allow people who now had to remain at home to get access to medicine they were used to getting, to get access to food if they didn't have the ability to make their way to the shops themselves, things like that. And we went from that moment to within 7 days, the first food and medicine parcels were arriving on people's doorsteps. And eventually 1 million people were registered to use this service. And we had to go and find most of them. The ingredients that made that possible was, one, the urgency of the pandemic, and never underestimate, don't waste a good crisis. The urgency really brought people together, and it blew a lot of the other things I listed, governance, policies, org design, etc. It blew them all away because everyone realized this stuff doesn't matter. It's about huddling together and bringing to the table what's of value. And most importantly, probably in that moment, the people who realized they couldn't be of value stepped away from the table and let the people who could get on with the job, instead of it being an all-consuming conversation. So collaboration, discipline around the roles that you occupy, discipline to know this is our data, we're the ones who need to bring it to the table and put it in the pot with other things, and then simplify. Government is very capable of tying itself in knots. That's part of being a monopoly provider of public services. Nobody's going to come and steal our lunch, so we can get left behind, but no one's going to start delivering public services on our behalf, whichever government you are, to your citizens, to meet their raised expectations and to hopefully address them through this new technology.
Chris, thank you. I'm losing you a little bit sound-wise, but just to ask you, at Scott Logic, what do you do that you do differently from government? I mean, is it more straightforward and simple? You get those teams and that clarity of decision making. What is it that you're delivering there that you didn't at government as such? Oh, we may have lost him.
No, he's still there, but he's on mute.
Ah, Chris, did you hear?
No,
maybe. Okay, we lost you. Okay, thank you very much. And now on to Josh Berle. Josh, are you there?
I'm here, Ashley. Hi there. Good morning from not so sunny northwest London, in actual fact.
Oh, well.
I will.
Thank you very much indeed. Just to introduce Josh Berle from Mastercard, who I think is particularly interested in smart cities. But in this instance, I've asked you to talk more generally about the consumer approach to data, if that's okay. So I'll leave it up to you, Josh, to go large for a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashley. Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Where I wanted to sort of lead on from this, just drawing on what previous speakers have said, is that data is or isn't rocket science, depending on what you want to get out of it. And the key question that I always raise with particularly public sector audiences, because my role is primarily around seeing to what extent the public sector in the UK and Ireland have an interest in data, and specifically Mastercard's data, which I'll come on to in a moment, is what are you trying to do? What is the essence of the problem statement that you're seeking to respond to, and to what extent, therefore, can one data set or another data set or data sets in combination perhaps give you some insights that are realistically actionable, that will lead to some improved means of policy making if you're government, or perhaps commercial decision making if you are a private company or a commercial organization of some sort. That's the key thing, to maintain clarity of purpose. Otherwise, data is basically just disorganized information, and you have to have some way of actually organizing it in a way that will be of use to you. So on to what Mastercard has to offer in this particular area. So if you can imagine, if you're a holder of a payment card of any sort, whether it be a credit, debit, or prepaid cards, those are the most common forms of cards that Mastercard has and that run on its payments network, which of course is a global network. Anytime you make a transaction, that leaves a data footprint. Now, it's important to state that that data footprint is anonymized to Mastercard. So Mastercard doesn't know who the holder of the card is. It doesn't even know what the card number is. It doesn't know what the company is if it's a commercial card and it's aligned to an organization is either. What it does see, though, is a consistent hashed token of that card, so that we can track its presence across our network. And if you can imagine, therefore, that transactions are being repeated by individuals and companies in locations all over the world, many thousands, if not millions, if not billions of times every day, that produces an incredibly powerful and insightful footprint of the world of spend over our particular network. Now, of course, some caveats. Mastercard isn't the only network out there. It isn't the only way of paying for things either. But for markets that are particularly well penetrated, so you're looking at Western Europe, you're looking at the UK and North America, but certainly not exclusively in areas of the developing world and particularly the Middle East, and often where banking infrastructure hasn't been as well developed, card payments where they can be used and set up quickly offer individuals a quick way of mobilizing. What that means is that you're going to have a very, very good insight into what's going on, particularly where cards are used. So the next question is, well, where are cards used? Typically, it's by people who are buying stuff in the retail space, somewhat less so in the wholesale and supply chain space. And this has meant, again, the pandemic was mentioned. What has particularly driven public sector interest, therefore, in the sorts of data that we can provide is because we provide an incredible insight into what's going on the high street. And the high streets, of course, have suffered hugely because lockdowns and restrictions in movement have meant people haven't been able to go out. And therefore, what our data is able to show is the extent to which these patterns are repeated across different geographical locations, different types of businesses and merchants and all the rest of it. And we can therefore make a comparison between what's being spent at what we say point of sale, a physical transaction, therefore at a checkout in a shop, say on a street, and an online transaction that would take place, of course, over the internet, whether at a laptop or via a phone, in your home or your office or wherever. So I have these discussions all the time, particularly with the public sector. And my question is, we don't have the monopoly of wisdom on what use cases this data can be put to. You tell us what you'd like to find out, and we'll come back to you and answer whether we think we have some value to add in that respect. And actually, to your point about what we do in the commercial space, ultimately we have exactly the same kind of conversations. The only difference, and this is quite a critical difference, is that whilst a private company, whether it be a shop, a chain or whatever, wants insight in terms of the spend of their customers, they are going to use that for commercial advantage and will keep it to themselves. The value to a public sector organization is that they actually want to share that data in order that there can be discussions and open access to a political debate over how to improve data. And the challenge for Mastercard, therefore, given that data is obviously one of our key assets, is how we control that. And we don't see that our data becomes effectively uncontrolled and something that we can't ultimately make some sort of return on. But it's one that we've addressed over the past 2 years or so by being very specific about understanding the context in which that data is going to be used. Actually, I hope that gives you a reasonable introduction into what data is all about for Mastercard.
Really interesting. And I'd actually just like to put a bit of a question to you, Josh, possibly
Sure.
if Chris is on the line, and actually Sean. And what's coming up is that I'm getting the sense that the purpose, the government policy purpose is important. I'm getting from Chris that the culture and how you organize and the focus is really important. And I'm wondering how you can persuade governments to act better, to organize internally. You may have the data, you may have the capability. The UK government is a bit more organized than some, but for an up and coming government that might be looking slightly worriedly about data and how to do it, someone like Iraq, how can you reassure them about getting, what do they need to do to get up to speed and how that can work? If that makes sense. Josh, do you want to start? And Sean, do you want to make comment on that?
Shall I start off because I'm having conversations of this sort all the time in actual fact, Ashley, and you may like to imagine that the UK public sector would be terrifically efficient in this respect. Not so. Some parts are better than others. I'm sure the government digital service that I've had the pleasure of working with on many occasions is obviously going to be an area of expertise for the government, but often a challenge that an organization like Mastercard faces, despite being a global brand, a global organization, is that many policymakers just won't know or won't appreciate that we have this capability, and therefore there's no reason why they should know. It's up to us to get out there and tell them that we have this, and that's partly what I've been doing fairly doggedly over the last 2 years, and had some success in that respect, which is great. A secondary problem, however, and I suspect this will be relevant to policymakers in Iraq, regardless of what access they've got to data, is to think about once they've thought about what they want to do, how they would value it. Because if you come to an organization like Mastercard, we are a commercial organization, and that means that, to an extent, to a greater or less degree, you are going to have to pay for these data sources. And that means you are going to have to put aside a certain amount of funding for that. And the question, therefore, is how do you judge what you need? And the experience I've had in the UK is that although UK policymakers talk a good game about the importance of data, what they haven't yet worked out is exactly how much better that is than current methods of data collection, which often consist of business surveys. Certainly the Office for National Statistics, our national statistician, does this, and it's a huge cottage industry, which on the one hand is very, very expensive and takes a long time and is only dealing with a very small sample of what you're interested in, and then delivers a result which is 6 months late. And on the other hand, I shop up with a product which on the face of it could be quite expensive, but is probably costing a lot less than this entire sort of mechanism of gathering all of that. And therefore I have a difficulty, therefore, in convincing my customer that actually they should pay XYZ for what it is I'm trying to offer. So, unless you have funding for this, you can't move forward anyway. So I think a serious think about exactly what budgets are appropriate is something that's really, really important as you develop an approach around data, and particularly private sources of data.
Thank you very much. Great insights, Josh. And Sean, would you like to comment on that? Is Sean on? Can I just check he's is he live, as it were? Yeah.
Sorry. Let's take it to Iraq, and I think what we've seen in a number of GCC countries is the need to diversify the economy. They want to increase the tax revenues. They want to make the country more conducive, more healthy, more encouraging, more attractive to investors and to businesses. They wanted to make it easier to start small businesses up, and so the motivation is there already, because if you heard the speaker this morning, the professor said there was about 65% of the workforce in Iraq is a government employee. I mean, the ILO says it's around 40% in transitioning countries. I mean, this is a lot more. I think Western Europe is 22%. So if you've got 50-60% of your workforce are government employees, if you want to increase the revenues for the country, if you want to diversify the economy, if you want to make it easier to do business, then you have to digitize a number of different things. And what we've seen in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Bahrain, and now in the Emirates, is they've invested in digitizing the tax platforms, which will rely heavily on data in looking at the policy, looking at the programs, looking at the outcomes, and also making it easier for the taxpayer, easier for the business to operate. And so, fiscal reform is key. And things like tax and revenue, things like the pensions, we're working with pensions agency in the region, with social protection agencies, workforce development agencies, who are starting to use more and more data to look at the strategic outcome that they desire, looking at the levers they can pull, and then understanding the impact of those levers using data to modify, evolve, and adapt their strategy along the way. And I think this is something we're going to see more and more of. In Southern Europe, we've got a project which is a regional government is using our tax platform around CO2 emissions for local residents in terms of cars. So we're starting to see more of the sustainability angle as well. And the thing is, tax is complicated, difficult, hard, lots of data. And what we found is the digital tax platforms using machine learning and AI doesn't mean to say, this is not possible for Iraq. When you have data sets that are vast, you can start applying machine learning AI techniques to get better at the data, better understanding the context of data, and also relating that to the outcomes. And so I think, fiscal reform agenda, that's a key area for the GCC countries. And I think this is something we're seeing more and more of.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go now to Professor Christine Slade, who's actually sitting on my right, on my left hand here. And Christina has done a wonderful project. In fact, she is, as rector of the Charles Sturt University, she has basically resurrected data in the university, and indeed in the social side in Australia. So tell us how that might be done from a very low base.
Well, yes. I was going to start by talking, I came on as rector of the university, having been a vice chancellor in England at a time of real problems. We had a pandemic, our international students had gone, and the university, which is spread across the west of New South Wales, rather very dispersed, 660 kilometres between various campuses, had rather lost its way in research. We had some good agricultural research, some good water research, some good bits and pieces in the medical sphere, but we had a lot still to do. And when I came in, we really needed to revitalise the research. And I think the reason that Ashley is interested in talking to me, because I'm not a techie, I cannot do the techie, but I came in and it was very clear to me that what we needed to do was to have the digital at the heart. So the digital regions. The great thing about our new society that we've all learned in the pandemic, it doesn't matter whether you're in London, Sydney, or Bathurst or Orange. And so what we did was we said, okay, our research strategy is going to be built around a group. We had a group of teaching IT, quite a large group of students. And we also did the training for the federal police on cybersecurity. So we had a little bit of a space there. And what we've done is we said, okay, let's see how we can make that the heart of our research enterprise. The agriculture and water is strong. So we then started to move towards issues like digital agriculture, which other people here know a lot more than I do, but cybersecurity, biosecurity, supply chains have been so important. Now the government couldn't wait. They immediately poured money in to those discussions. We had a new regional health research institute, but we have in our region, this very widespread region, a lot of rural health issues, particularly with the Indigenous people. We needed to start to get longitudinal data, but that's been very sensitive. So we had to have someone who was really good at randomization. And I still worry about the privacy issues, I should say, Josh. I still am not entirely happy about commercial ownership of some of these data. But what we did was begin to turn it around so that the whole university was going to be the heart of regional data. And it's working. And we've just brought in, actually appointed last, I don't know, I was on the appointments, I chaired the appointments committee last week, and I hope that the appointments have been made of two chairs, two professorial appointments in this data space, which will help us, one on data mining and artificial intelligence, the other one with a cyber focus, but with a quite an interesting cyber focus, very much on the, she's a, I probably shouldn't say that, but she is a specialist on the behavioral data of cyber. And I think that's going to really help us, particularly with trying to have an area. So I think the reason that Ashley was interested is because you don't need a big group. You need a group that's prepared to work with other people. That's very important. You need to keep your focus. And so we're regional data. We're not going to be the next, Turing and we're probably not the best algorithms, get the best algorithms, but we could be good. Really focused. And actually, I've also insisted that we have, which is because of my interest, a very strong understanding of the issues of ethics and privacy, which is something that hasn't come in yet. Strongly connected across the major disciplines of the university, but industry as well. So quite luckily, we got IBM into the Bathurst campus, and that will really help us to bring students in and make it stronger.
That's a terrific story. And how many people did you have when you say a small team? I mean, what did you based it around? I think 1 or 2 people.
Well, look, we had about, we had the teams teaching IT, which tended to be professional, and then, no, I think it was about 3 or 4 people. And then they managed to bring in this group of 6 people. And it was a very interesting group. The Australian, nobody wants to go and live it, or didn't want before the pandemic to live, it's only 4 hours from Sydney, but people didn't want to go. And so a group went, and many of them were from Pakistan and Bangladesh, and they became really quite strong. And now we've probably got about 8, and I will aim to get to 20 in that research side. We still have the people doing the teaching.
So a relatively small group of people
really
can make a major change in terms of data and social management, interaction with government. Is that the
exactly? And that the government can't, right now, we happen to have a government that is partly a coalition, including the Farmers' Party or the regional party, and they cannot, I shouldn't say this, stop themselves giving us money.
Well, what a lovely place to be. And in terms of Iraqi universities, they could do a similar thing, couldn't they? They could be centers of excellence of data, quickly, simply, for the government of Iraq.
So the reason I mentioned the fact that we were spread is that you could take a network of universities and have one data group working together. You know, somebody who's real, but you've got to have open-minded people. The sorts of issues that we've got are so like the ones in Iraq, dry land, water, the digital agriculture issues and why they're so important. And of course, this tracking, what do they call it, from field to tracking of yes, I'll leave that one to someone who can speak. Tracking of animals.
Thank you very much, Christina. Now I'm handing over, very topical actually, to Shamal Mohammed, who has recently just left the UK's Agri Epicenter and is now working as an independent consultant for Silal. Silal, yes. And that's a very neat handover. And maybe you could give us an overview of, in terms of digital and data use in the UK's AgriTech sector and from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it is important to understand the value of data in agriculture, especially for a country like Iraq, and how the data can contribute into some of the societal challenges like food security. I mean, this morning we heard the population in Iraq is growing very, very fast, and unemployment is very high, and also there is a huge dependency on food imports. So all of that is really a huge challenge for agriculture, for the whole of Iraq in general. And on top of that, we have a climate change. If you look at some of the projection, in 2050, Iraq is getting more hotter, less rain, and the production is going to go down. So the only way is to diversify the economy and to support the agriculture. And I think for the agriculture industry in general, the data is started, the revolution started in 1990s when the GPS was sort of opened up for the civil sort of application. So now we have the ability to collect and record data for any location on the planet. And that was a really revolutionized the agriculture industry and created a new sector of precision agriculture. So we know now we can measure the variation, the differences even within the field. So we can manage the field separately. Some part might be very productive, some other part might not be very productive. So we have that sort of an insight into the variability in terms of our production. Christina mentioned the tracking animals. So that's something is very sort of a common in the UK. We had a sort of a dairy farm where the cows, they have multiple sensors. We can measure and track the movement, the behavior, and we can understand and pick up the unhealthy cow in a very early stages, which allow farmers to minimize the cost and the cost of their production. We've done something else in Paraguay, which is a very similar sort of a developing country, is by using automated ways of weighing the animal. Because if there is any changes in the dietary and the nutrition, we can pick up these animals very quickly, and then we can change the dietary requirement and make sure they are not losing. So the data and technology actually, providing farmers with more insight. I mean, all the other speakers mentioned, data in itself is really, has no any value if you're not doing an analysis, if you're not giving you an insight to make better decision. And I think this is how the data in agriculture can help farmers in Iraq. So if you look back in the last maybe a couple of decades, the cost of storage of data is being reduced massively. It's easier to collect. We have a mobile device. Satellite imagery is a great source of data. I mean, when I started doing my sort of PhD 10 years ago, finding a right platform to get a nice satellite imagery was really difficult. Now it's available free of charge. So that will give you a much better understanding about the variability on the spatial as well as temporal scale. So it's just a matter of having a vision within Iraqi government to create a hub for utilizing, I mean, we can probably start with the AI and machine learning, but at least we can start with some baby steps and then starting from the basics and collecting data about our soils, our land, and then trying to help farmers and small farmers to have more access to markets, to finance, and all of that the technology can facilitate. And then there are many initiatives, and there are many British companies providing this kind of tools and technologies, not only in the UK, but also around the globe. So there's a huge opportunities there, but it's just a matter of how we can use that opportunity.
Now, Shamal, you're Iraqi, and also you're very passionate about Iraq.
Absolutely.
Where would you start? I mean, because I suspect the farmers are doing very basic things, and they might be scared by this, although they may have mobile phones. Where would you actually start? What would be, if you had a priority 1, 2, 3? What would be your suggestion if you were minister tomorrow?
Yes, well, I think for any sort of sectors, especially in AgriTech and in agriculture in general, I think there are 4 key areas where the government and the policymakers need to put a bit of more resource and investment. So first of all, you have to create an ecosystem for innovation. Inviting British company and other companies and research organizations to build the capacity and the solution that really fit with Iraq need and requirement. So that's one. And secondly, you need to have a pipeline of innovation, which is R&D, working with universities, building up the capacity. And thirdly, helping the adoption of this technology. Because if you look at the farmers in Iraq, very small holders, they probably don't have investment in these sort of technologies, but it need to be some way the government providing support. So instead of giving them fertilizer on a discounted prices, give them a better scheme to increase productivity, but also improving the environmental aspect of their farm as well. So I think, and also building the capacity. We need to have a technician and expert in Iraq, because technology in itself is the easy part. We can go and buy the technology. The important bit is how to utilize it. It's almost like if you have a very nice car, but you can't drive, it's really pointless. So this is exactly similar in agriculture. All these technologies is actually adding value when the user, the farmers and advisors, can utilize and get the value for the farm businesses.
Terrific point. I think Josh made a point earlier about what the purpose of it is, what you want to do with it, and making the decision about the purpose is really clear. Exactly. And then making sure you've got the focus and the ability of the people in government to help action this, and then you can bring all these things on.
Exactly. And we can start with the pilot. We don't need to transform the whole industry in a week or a month or a year. But the government and the policymakers can start with a pilot project that can demonstrate the value of this technology to the farmers as well as to themselves, to see there is actually a value. Because actually, if you look at the agri-food sector, they create more jobs than any other sectors in any country. Because if you are in oil or gas or a bank, because the food supply chain is required people who's supplying the input to the farmers, the people working on the farm, the people who transporting, processing, selling, consuming the food. So if you look at it, the food supply chain is the longest supply chain of any other industry. So it will answer some of these challenges around employment. I think they said every year is like 350,000 people get unemployed in Iraq, and young people, 80% of them is unemployed. So you're making agriculture industry more attractive to the young generation, because they can use technology, they can use data, is more in line with their sort of the way they brought up in the last few decades.
Absolutely super. Thank you very much. And I think we might hear a little bit more later from you about technology and supply chains in the UAE.
Exactly.
Thank you. So finally, but not last, we're coming to Raj Sandhu. Raj, hello, you there?
Hi, yes, you can hear me?
I accuse you of being, I didn't get your name right originally, but it's Sandhu, that's for sure. And you're the chief executive of Bikal. I got a feeling you might be in Tashkent or somewhere exciting like that.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay. Now, I think what you're going to talk about, you deal a lot with AI and data, etc. But I think the key message I think you may be talking about is how you don't have to have complicated data. You just have to get it, even from legacy systems. So can I hand over for you for a couple of minutes? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. As the panel mentioned, things around data, the type of data, and what to do with it. Obviously, talked about digitization as well. So digitizing your data sets to make them usable for AI. Where do you start and where do you sort of finish? How far back do you go? AI relies on bigger historic records to be a better algorithm. More diverse sets of data makes it a better AI, more reliable AI for predictions. But legacy systems, I think, and I don't want to go too technical, but legacy systems can occur quite sort of recent. A couple of examples are, we're speaking to a telecom operator at the moment. They have what they call a data warehouse. Now, they don't have a data lake. So you could say that's a bit of a legacy system. You've got another very well-known insurer in the UK. They've got a 50-year-old data system, which is run on tape. And they just don't want to touch it because obviously, again, the risks around changing that and migrating that. And then we're working with some sectors, mainly government in other parts of the world, like say in Central Asia, in the Middle East, where things are on paper, okay, paper, film, different types of media. And so the value, and then you have to ask, what is the value of digitizing those records? Is there value in it? Is there value from a sort of historical, sentimental, can you make a museum out of that, that data? Can you give it to the local museum? Or is there some other educational factor within that? Or is there actual data? Talking about agriculture, the longer you can go back, I think there's good records you can generate that AI models require in terms of environmental changes, in terms of crops and other historical information that sits within there. So that's a question I think you have to ask, is how far can you go back? It's actually not that hard. I don't think that hard now to actually digitize a lot of that old media and content. We're doing something out here now with regards to water, where there's lots of archive records in film, into negatives even, and documents. And basically we're going to run it through a machine vision and some other sort of AI systems, and we'll digitize it and then run the algorithms through it. But we'll do it piece by piece. That's the key, I think, message everybody's been giving.
And we've had this confluence between the private sector and government, and sometimes the difficulty of dealing with governments. You're probably dealing with governments. What's your view of how do you get them to action these things and what works for them?
I think you've got to help them think about the value of it. So you may not have a direct commercial, if you process this data and this will save you XYZ money. Is there some other historical meaning to that data? Is there some other aspect to that data that could be used for especially somewhere like Iraq, where a lot of records may have been destroyed, and you want to get a hold of every piece of data. So helping them with the value is important.
Thank you very much. And Raj, just to be clear, what you do, you take data and then you convert it into clear digital, pure, as someone said, the new gold. The new oil is the new gold, data is the new gold. Is that what you're effectively doing? Essentially, yeah. As soon as it's getting digitized, it's coming into a hard drive. We've got the GPUs working on it. The algorithms are set up on there. So as it's coming in, we've got the training algorithms worked on that, and we improve it. We label 100-year-old photos as well as we can, and that's part. Unfortunately, it's not the exciting part of AI, but you have to organize that data some way. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we've come to the end of the first session, almost on time, which is wonderful. So thank you, all the panelists. I'm getting very clear messages here that data is the new oil, which I really like the sound of, as we've got everyone in oil next door. And so that's a good thing. Secondly, that it's about clarity and organization and the models you want to do and the platforms you need to do this from. The fact that you shouldn't be scared of data, you can use legacy systems, you just need information that you can then migrate onto new platforms. So it shouldn't be something a problem. And then listening to Christina Sturt, for example, Christina at Sturt University, this is something that you can set up simply and easily. You can do it with universities, you can work closely with other third parties and government parties. So there's a lot of opportunity here. It shouldn't be complex. No one should be scared of it. And I think I'd obviously like to encourage Iraqis to start to embrace this, because as Sean pointed out earlier, everyone's got phones, they're using them anyway. So, you don't want, the governments don't want to be left behind when the young people are doing something completely different. So thank you for listening. The second half, which we're going to start now, is a little bit more specific about what people are actually doing in certain sectors. And I'd like to invite back Josh Berle from Mastercard, who is going to talk more specifically about smart cities. So Josh, if I could bring you back on, it'd be great to hear from you. Thank you.
Yes, no problem at all. So we were speaking about data just before. One area where Mastercard has, over the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, sought to deploy both its data capabilities, but also its infrastructure capabilities, is in relation to this concept of the smart city, which has been evolving for, well, maybe at least a couple of decades. That the idea of a smart city is that cities are obviously where there is an agglomeration of people, lots of people reliant on lots of services, all in a relatively small space. And this can become difficult to organize from a policy perspective. How do you make life better? How do you make life cleaner and cheaper in these very, very intensely organized and packed places? And this is where the idea of the smart city comes from, in terms of using technology to enable better ways to move around, better ways to organize the high street, better ways to provide public services as well. And to an extent that relies on infrastructure and it relies on data. So what's Mastercard's angle on all of this? Well, what we have done is curate a network of cities around the world, primarily for the purposes of bringing different areas of expertise together so that experiences can be shared and compared, and services perhaps launched as well, some from Mastercard, some from other vendors as well, within a relatively controlled and friendly environment. What Mastercard has to offer, for example, is data that I've alluded to already, but also because we have these various different products being developed currently on our network, we can also offer angles on digital ID, which means access to services, whether provided by a central agency or by the city itself. We can also offer services in relation to transit, the way you can pay more easily in order to go on and off different networks of transport within a city as well. For example, in London, Transport for London, which is our coordinating transport body, has been described by some people as the largest fintech organization in the world. Why is that? Well, it's because they were responsible some 15 years ago for the introduction of tools like the congestion charging zone, which controlled ingress of traffic into a very busy area. But more importantly, for more people, the Oyster card system, which enables people to move seamlessly onto buses and tube trains and even mainline trains as well. What did this enable? Quicker management of volume onto and off the network, and an easier and more transparent way of actually developing and managing revenue in that respect. Following hot on the heels of the Oyster card was the contactless revolution, and TfL was the first large organization around the world to do this, and that in a way is the nub of the idea of the smart city. But there are other things that can be done, both with Mastercard but with other technologies as well. Ways of understanding footfall, data from mobile phone companies can provide that, as well as other dedicated technologies such as LiDAR, which measure people's movements around a high street. Again, where is that important? Well, in terms of very busy area, in terms of public order for policing, or marches and demonstrations, or celebrations and pop concerts. And similar applications also relate to the way in which traffic moves around a city as well. I mentioned the congestion charging zone, but applications such as road pricing, dynamic blocking of roads to certain types of traffic, depending on the time of day. These are all concepts of the smart city, and Mastercard's angle on this particularly is ways in which this can be mobilized to enable payment where that is required, elements of digital ID, given the ID that you attach to a payment network is so important. And also elements of security as well in terms of those payments too. There are other things that we're active on around providing payment cards that can only be used within geographically circumscribed areas. This is something that payment card technology allows you to do, both in terms of geography and in terms of types of shops or types of merchants as well. And in the context of our network called City Possible, And if you type in City Possible by Mastercard into Google, you'll find out all about what we're doing in that respect. We can offer some support to cities that want to see whether they can harness some of these technologies to simply ease their population's access to good services and ultimately improve their quality of life. Actually, I hope that's a reasonable introduction in terms of what smart cities is and what Mastercard's involvement in it is as well.
Thank you, Josh. It's really interesting. I think there's a nice smorgasbord of all the things you can do here. And hopefully places like Baghdad or Basra, Erbil might start to think about these things as options. I mean, at the moment, I think in Iraq, you help deal with things like payments to public sector. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, obviously, in a country like Iraq, levels of acceptance, in other words, the number of merchants that accept Mastercards as payment is probably not as well developed as it is elsewhere, but I'm pretty sure it's still pretty well prevalent, not least because, as you reminded me a couple of weeks ago, actually, as we were preparing for this, Mastercard actually has an arrangement with the Iraqi government in where certain numbers of civil servants have their salaries paid on to a Mastercard, which clearly they're going to have to be able to remit somewhere, either at a bank or an ATM or at a shop. So there's that's one particular application that uses our network of many that we could talk about.
And at the moment, I'm not sure Iraq is using any smart city data, is it, that you're aware of, or maybe it is?
Well, I'm not aware of it, I have to say, but then, and to my shame, I'm not an expert on the Iraqi territory, but there are probably other people on this panel who know more about that than me. But I'd be very, very happy to take any interest up with our City Possible network to see what more we could do.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I'm coming on to Riad. Chehayeb, Riad, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon.
Hello, Riad looks after Serco in Iraq, and in particular, the air traffic control, which is has several benefits, I think. Riad, look forward to hearing from you and how you use data for the benefit of obviously Serco and also the Iraqi government.
Absolutely, thank you, and thank you for having me join you. So we have a lot of aspirations at Serco. We're a large government services provider, and I believe most, if not all, of our contracts touch some sort of data manipulation in one form or another. One of the areas where we apply a lot of data and data management strategies is in predictive maintenance scheduling for assets, either our own or our clients, which allows us to really look at managing the asset life cycle and optimizing when you would assign an asset for servicing in order to maximize its productivity, minimize the cost of servicing, and allow it to operate for as long as possible. Another area, maybe a little bit closer to what I would do, is involved in the learning and training environment, where we use data and analyze the information to look at learner experience and learner progression. And then we can customize training modules to better support the student learner in their progress. Specifically to my field in air navigation services and where aviation is concerned, we rely heavily on the use of real-time data to manage traffic flow, to avoid conflict and congestion, and to manage the workforce management of staff so that we have the right number of people at any time managing aircraft and minimizing delays. And I can give you one practical example of where the transformation towards this data usage today differs than what we did maybe not so long ago, a few years back. Take an example of an aircraft departing from Europe and landing here in Dubai. In the past, that aircraft would be manually transferred. The information of that aircraft would be manually transferred from one air traffic controller to the second along the geographic flight path of the aircraft. And then as the receiving controller gets that information, now, minutes before the aircraft enters into his sector or her sector, they need to look at the situation and conflict and maneuver the aircraft in whichever way they need to in order to make sure it goes through the sector in a safe manner, and then do the same thing and transfer it to the next sector. today's technology allows us to, at Dubai, get information on the aircraft as soon as it departs. It's reliable information. It's integrated into the weather systems. So we have a much more accurate idea of when that aircraft is going to be approaching the airport, which then allows us to go back to as far back as places like Iraq and then make a small request for a minimal speed adjustment on the aircraft. It allows the aircraft and the airline fuel efficiencies and cost optimization. It provides for a smoother flight and a better customer experience. And it allows the aircraft then to be arriving at or near the airport in the proper sequence for it to be able to make use of all of the other services after it lands. Of course, the gate service and terminals and immigration and so on.
That's fascinating. Really interesting. I'm really comforted by the fact you've got data in real time, but I'm also worried the fact in the past they used to hand it over to the next air traffic controller. What could possibly have gone wrong? I think you also do, is a bit of revenue yielding as well for governments?
Yes, of course. So as part of the collection of data, then you're collecting information about when an aircraft is entering a boundary of a state and then exiting that boundary. And then we work within the ICAO parameters to supply other companies who actually do billing with that information. So you get information passed to them on entry times and exit times and how long an aircraft and how many miles it flew in an airspace. And then, Iraq has a contract with IATA. So IATA manages the air navigation service charges, provides the billing directly, invoicing directly to the airlines, and then remits those amounts into the state accounts.
I mean, I obviously don't want to go into detail, but I think now you started doing this for Iraq, I think it's generated quite a lot of money for them, hasn't it?
Yes, I mean, as traffic increases and as you manage the aircraft more accurately, then of course that generates higher revenues. Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, and now we're going to go to Paul Dickenson. Paul, are you there? We're going to have more of a session now on agriculture and water, which I think is pretty crucial to Iraq. Paul, can you beam in, please?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Ashley.
Thank you. Just to explain that you're not only talking for British Water, but also for Nuron as well, who I think have had some very exciting developments recently.
Yes. So just by way of introduction, so I have two hats on today. I'm chair of the British Water Data Analytics Group, which is an industry body in the UK looking at how data can be better used within the water industry. I'm also technical director of Nuron, as you can see behind me, and we developed a dual-purpose fibre optic monitoring and broadband system, which I'll mention in passing later on. But primarily, I'm going to speak a little bit about how data is used in the water industry and what lessons there might be there. So, as I'm sure we're all very aware, water distribution, access, and then to some extent wastewater collection are some of the oldest utilities that have ever been in existence. There are well-documented cases of water distribution networks in Iraq and surrounding areas for thousands of years. And certainly in terms of what we might call sort of modern day sanitation, there are many systems that are still in operation all over the world that are several hundred years old. And generally speaking, those are highly passive systems. So they were deliberately designed that water goes in at one end and arrives at the other end for usage. And then more recently, wastewater is similarly discharged into a network, collected somewhere else and hopefully treated. Now, that treatment aspect of it, both at water supply and wastewater collection and discharge, that has moved on substantially over the last 50, 60 years. But actually, there's been a real revolution in terms of the collection and the distribution of that water and wastewater over about the last 20 in many countries, the UK being a pretty good example of that. The first thing that happened, just take you through a little bit of the kind of the history of this, because I think it provides some pointers on how data can start to change a sector. The first thing that happened was the introduction of customer data, first of all through billing and then eventually through metering. So that's very large databases of fairly sensitive data actually about who is connected to the network, how they're paying, providing them with bills, and now that in countries where metering is more commonplace, how much they're actually using. And that data, when anonymized, can be used for quite useful purposes in terms of looking for usage patterns and driving behavior change. But generally, it tends to stay locked up in the in a virtual filing cabinet in the water company, who regards it as a little too sensitive to release to people like myself. So there's a bit of a challenge there. The second thing that happened in the sector is a drive by regulation, plus some commercial aspects, as water in some countries has become more privatized, to look at things like clean water leak detection. So until about 25 years ago in the UK, about 30 to 40% of our water leaked out of the networks. This is very commonplace. Now in the UK, we have a fair bit of water. I'm joining you from sunny Surrey today in the south of England, and it rains quite a lot, as you might be aware. Of course, in other parts of the world, that is less acceptable to leak that kind of water, and I'll touch on that in a moment. How that could be different in other regions, namely Iraq. Much more recently, the wastewater side of things, which is where I make my living, has kind of caught up with clean water, or started to catch up with clean water. It's historically been much more passive, and that's generally driven by environmental concerns, some cost as well. So trying to shift from being very reactive, that is, for example, someone gets a blocked sewer, a homeowner phones up and says that they've got a problem, and a water company responds. Very reactive way of working, very costly. They're trying to move to a much more proactive way of working. That's quite difficult with conventional technologies. That's where our at Nuron, that's where our system comes in. But broadly speaking, there is a shift towards improving environmental performance, and again, that's driven by regulation in large part. I've mentioned of AI already today. I think I'll just echo the fact that AI is only really as good as the data. It's not a magic wand. So good data streams and also large volume data streams are needed. And to just finish off, I'd say sort of, well, now what? I think there's a real choice for water industries around the world of either building more, and that's the default option. Everybody understands laying some pipes and building some concrete, or build smart. And in countries like the UK, we are faced with the question of how we smarten our networks that exist. So take them from being passive to being smart. And a major part of that is about data collection. But in countries where they're wishing to greatly upgrade that network anyway, or indeed build a lot of it from scratch, there is actually an opportunity to go straight to a smart network. And we've Nuron and at British Water, we've looked at some case studies for that kind of project, and actually building in the data side and data collection. Not only is the cost relatively small compared to the overall capital cost of those projects, but actually you can immediately save money because you can go for a smaller capex build by making the network smart. So there's actually a sort of day one business case for including water data collection and data management in water. And overall, that makes it potentially the backbone to smart cities as a utility which serves everybody, and I think we'd all agree is absolutely vital to life.
Really interesting. You're going to talk about waste a bit, but also could I just touch on agriculture? Are there, obviously Iraq is a bit stressed in terms of water availability, how it's using agriculture. Is there anything you could add on that front, particularly in the Middle Eastern countries where water is scarce? Obviously you want to manage it, but any other thoughts you have on that front?
Yes, I mean the overall one is and this is a misquote actually deliberately, but it tends to be quite well used, is if you're not measuring it, you can't manage it. The originator of that went on to say something else afterwards that slightly discredits it actually, but I think it is ultimately true, and we've already had mention of the growth of mobile device usage all over the world, and that actually the approach that we take to managing water in agriculture, for example, I think, just as I said about going straight to smart, we should not necessarily look just at what has the the historical pathway taken by other countries that may be perhaps further along that journey, there are shortcuts that can be taken due to current technology. So, for example, the fiber optic monitoring that I work with has the potential to tell you what's happening everywhere in your irrigation network cheaply and to a very high level of resolution, rather than historically people going to make measurements, for example, manually or spot monitors that are distributed around the network.
And just a little bit about Nuron. I mean, you are, I assume, working in the Middle East, and has it been the case there's been a bit of investment in your company lately? Or am I getting carried away with another one that recently spoke on IBBC's platform?
So we've not had investment from Middle East origin at the moment. No, we're quite globally spread actually now, and our experience has been that there is strong interest in water technology within the region, which I think comes in large part from the value that's attached to water. So in operating in Western Europe and North America, which is our home market, we get quite used to the idea that water is plentiful and not really regarded as a high value resource. Once you're into a water stressed environment, as parts of Iraq certainly are, you can make a business case much more directly for, I will save you X cubic meters of water per day. That has a value, and that can then be monetized to justify project. Equally, if I just flip onto the other side, wastewater is a valuable product. It's a little bit something that I bang on about quite a lot. Wastewater is traditionally viewed as purely a cost, something to be got rid of, a bit of a nuisance. It's a really valuable product in terms of the organic material that's inside it. So in terms of generating biogas, in a greenhouse gas constrained environment, that's valuable. It's a renewable resource, but also just the water itself. If you're in a water stressed environment, it's really valuable to keep hold of that water. Don't lose it from your network. Process it, and it can be reused for irrigation safely and even for human consumption.
Thank you very much. It sounds to me like the whole management of water is a no-brainer. Do you find there's any resistance in certain areas to investing in your products, or is generally it's received with open arms?
That's a great question, actually, and it's very much dependent on the regulatory environment. So I think, as I said, depending on the environment, you can make business cases directly for this. In a water-stressed environment, there is often just a simple commercial justification. In others, it is dependent on what the drivers are on a water operator, whether that's a commercial company or it is in many cases it's a municipality or a government. If they are being pushed to improve performance, then they will look for these kind of solutions. If they're not being driven towards that, then there can be a tendency to look for simply the cheapest option. But generally speaking, if you look at these things in the round, there is a definite and growing business case for smart technologies in water, and it's a very generalized statement, but generally speaking, there is a business case there.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Much appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to hand over again to Shamal Mohammed, who knows a bit about this and also about agriculture in particular. So I'll let you go into detail, particularly the UAA experience I think you have at the moment.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks. Actually, I think currently I'm working for a company called Silal. It's a new company based in Abu Dhabi. Started last year and as a sort of a consequence of COVID and a disruption in the food supply chain. And the way we structured is working with the local farmers. So we're working with near 1,000 local farmers in Abu Dhabi, mostly with the low or medium technology. So we're not really into vertical farming and very high-tech systems. And the way we work is obviously kind of managing the whole supply chain. So we buy in bulk all the sort of fertilizer seed in bulk. So we have some sort of bargaining purchasing power. Then we are in a position of providing this input in a bit more discounted prices to the farmers. And then we provide the technology as well as the technical advice to improve their local production, improving quality, And then the farmers are signing a contract with us to sell their products. So we buy them, we buy all the fresh produce, and obviously we manage the whole supply chain in terms of sort of a transport, distribution, storage, package, and we will negotiate the price with the retailers. And that's where we kind of find in the different marketing channels for them. So the whole idea is to provide a support in terms of technology, but also in terms of advice to help the local farmers increase productivity as well as the quality in order to replace some of the dependency on import. Because when any sort of a shock happened to the system, like COVID, for example, last year, so any countries can buy grains and rice and oil, so you can store it for months and years. But the problem with the vegetables and fruit is not really, it's a much shorter supply chain. So you need to have that sort of a local production. So this is how we operate. So my role is more looking at some of this technology space in UK and other countries that is relevant to the farmers here and helping them to improve the efficiency of their businesses and helping them to make better decisions. So this is how we operate at Silal in Abu Dhabi.
That's very interesting, because you'll then have a model, not just for Abu Dhabi. Would that be then transferable to Iraq, for example?
Absolutely. It's just it's a really sort of like a cooperative commercial model, if you like. So we work with the farmers. We are not really buyers. It's not that the relationship is not like selling and buying products. It's more a partnership to improve productivity. And that's why we have around 20 advisors providing the technical advice. We're investing in technologies, we're investing in R&Ds, but also we have a couple of very interesting initiatives. So this year we selected 40 farms, and we're going to build brand new greenhouses, net houses with new irrigation system, modern technologies, and we're going to operate it for 5 years, only for 1 hectare in each farm, in order to showcase and demonstrate the value of this technology and this type of investment. Obviously, we don't have funding to upgrade all the 24,000 farmers in Abu Dhabi and the UAE, but the idea is to demonstrate the value of technology and the value of investment and how it can help farmers going forward. And obviously, there are various different other supports within the governments and the leadership council to support the farming sector, because it's a huge part of the food security, which is a high priority for UAE and most of the Middle East, basically.
That's very interesting. Have you got a prediction as to the sort of upswing in productivity you're expecting to see based on this new greenhouse and these new technologies? What will be the dynamic of that?
Yes, so I think that the strategy for the UAE is quite diverse as well. So, our Silal's remit and mandate is a local farmers, but also there are many other organizations investing in high tech. So many vertical farming companies based in Dubai, as well as in Abu Dhabi. There is a AgriTech park in Abu Dhabi. There is an AgriTech Valley in Dubai. So it's attracting companies all over the world with cutting edge solutions. And I think you remember, actually, last time we had the event back in May or June, there was a discussion or an example from a British company who developed this technology to desalinate water using the solar power, and it's called Solar Water. They just signed a partnership with one of the investment companies in Dubai last week, which using just the sunlight basically to desalinate the seawater, and that's how they're trying to diversify the investment to help the whole food security agenda. And I think there is a clear commitment from the leadership council and the leadership of UAE to make the food security at the heart of their decision in agriculture and the whole food supply chain.
Amazing. So you wouldn't really be drawn on numbers, would you, in terms of upswing? But is it if you've got a modern setup, could it be 3 or 4 times the productivity in the
absolutely.
area?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think this is where productivity is one part, but also improving the quality, reducing the cost of production. In this country, Water is very, very expensive for irrigation. If you're using the tap water on your tap, is costing like 3 dirham per cubic meters. For irrigation, it costs quite a lot. So you need to think about a different alternative. Groundwater is very saline as well, so you need to desalinate. To desalinate, you need more energy, and that will cost you more. So it's a very challenging environment. But I think the same model, if you try to replicate it in Iraq, it might work better because the natural resources and the capabilities is better. The weather is better. I mean, I was in a farm in July. The temperature was like 45, 50 degrees with a very sandy soil and then a saline water. So if we can grow crop here and be more profitable, I think we can use the same model in Iraq and replicate it.
Just to put a COP20 thing in here, I mean, if we're going to be seeing rising sea levels, then we're going to get more salination in low-lying areas. So this could be a very good solution to the areas that are prone to salt salination.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not only that, because if you are extracting water in the ground, in aquifers, in the groundwater, you basically increasing the salinity in the aquifer as well. And that's another problem, the salinity in the soil. You are applying this saline water in the soil. So there is a huge challenges for all the countries in Middle East, but also if we just think about soil, the huge problem in Middle East is the food waste. Managing that food waste and use it as a resources to improve your soil and bringing that nutrition back into the soil to grow a better and high nutrition crop is quite an important one as well, because more and more we need to think about the circular idea of economy and how we can, closing all this loop in terms of energy, food waste, nutritional waste.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we're going to have another AgriTech conversation. Raj, are you there? Did you want to comment at all? If you're there, would you like to comment on what you're doing in Uzbekistan on water? Or I think you might have gone.
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Raj. Did you want any comment on the water use at all? How you're viewing that from where you are in a probably not a dissimilar environment?
Yeah, no. So yeah, I mean, essentially it comes back down to modeling, right? So the reason why we are basically trying to digitize a lot of the archive data is to gain more credible models. You can lift some modeling from other countries. Obviously, the UK has a more established system in terms of water distribution, but each country is different, and so to actually be able to predict what will happen in regards to your water demand and your water supply, especially in economies that are growing rapidly. I think that's something that needs to be built in. And also that countries that have water issues. Obviously, there's some transboundary issues in Central Asia, as there are in northern Iraq as well. So being able to control, or being able to predict what your demand is, and then obviously be able to effectively measure where your supply is coming from becomes important in terms of getting a more reliable prediction to then act on.
Thank you very much indeed, Raj. And finally, not least, I'd like to introduce Will Follett from Restrata. We're moving away from agriculture and water, more towards, I think, efficiency in oil fields and cybersecurity. Will, you know what you're going to talk about. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Ashley, thank you, and very many thanks for the invitation. So I've been asked to talk about the practical use of data and how Restrata are helping clients in Iraq at the moment, using the data to improve their operational effectiveness. So as we're talking about data, thought I'd put some stats up. So Restrata is a security, safety, crisis management business. We've been in Iraq since 2006, predominantly helping energy sector, and within that oil and gas. And then I guess the key for this is that we've put in a number of different technologies which use data, from access to control to perimeter detection to tracking both vehicles and personnel. So this use of data we really see as pretty important in terms of how we're moving forward. So this long history in some of the largest organizations, and ultimately using data to help prepare, digitize, and then respond to events more effectively. So the use of data really we see as across all of the sites. really helps to improve the sort of situational awareness. It enables clients to improve their operational effectiveness and saves money whilst also delivering a duty of care to both their employees and the subcontractors that have on those sites. The gap that we saw is this, the delta that exists between a physical infrastructure and a technology which might be on site through to the challenge from a response mechanism. So we designed the Restrata platform to fit this, and we've implemented this now across multiple different sites in Iraq, from either on a single site to the last mile and right across from a country, regional or global network. So the challenge we have, and where we've been talking about data, and it can be a bit of a, it can cause, certainly in Iraq, we found that the data that is required now, practical data, actually does exist, or the information does exist. So on most of the sites we're working on, this information is across multiple different formats. So either be from T-card systems, it could be through spreadsheets, it could be through archived logs, or indeed from some bespoke software. The challenge we've had there is when it gets to this critical information in times of either crisis or emergency response, trying to find this the data is what we call system hopping. So you're jumping from one resource to another when you're desperately trying to make decisions with all this data at hand and readily available. So the Restrata platform, that's what we developed to overcome this challenge. By integrating the data from access control systems, from travel management systems, from HR information, from vehicle tracking data, from personnel tracking data if it's available. We use this data to more efficiently run day-to-day operations, as well as then respond to crisis. And where there is a gap, and where it does exist, we can then help bridge that gap through mobile applications, which are then on handheld devices, which link back to the platform, which is then integrated with existing technologies which might be in place. So this data stream then provides a number of different usages, which in the oil and gas sector is critical information. So that can be from real-time POB or sort of a head count across all the sites, or indeed zones within those sites. It could be through mustering times and reducing those mustering times through a digital muster. It could be through effective travel management, that's either international travel or through in-country trips. Accurate time and attendance, which is so important for IOCs, for contractors, subcontractors, especially in this in the cost recoverable market that is in Iraq. And then in more recent times for COVID, for contact tracing and for zonal tracing as well. So, and what we found then, this data can be used by multiple different stakeholders. So as opposed to the silos in different industries, in different departments, we've now seen that security, HSE, HR, people logistics, facilities management are all using the same system, and they're adding data into it. And each department is building the overall situational awareness across the organization. So the software is offering multiple different modules, but each bringing its own different capability to help build from both the bottom-up approach, but also then a top-down approach. So in conclusion, there is already a significant amount of data and information that exists. We've just got to try and use it more efficiently, and this can be very quickly done to both inform decision-making, but increase operational effectiveness, reduce operating costs, and ultimately it provides the scalability for future data ingestions and integration.
Well, thank you very much. Just a quick question. I mean, you talked about oil and gas there as a sector, but you've got an integrated system here that could possibly go into other areas, other sectors. What other sectors are you eyeing up or already working with?
Yeah, so it's because it's a personnel-based system. So any organization which has got a large number of personnel. So we've seen it in manufacturing, we've seen it in construction. In fact, during COVID times, we actually did a lot of the biosecure bubbles. We did it for here in the UAE across the Indian Premier League and for the the Pakistan Super League, in fact. So a multitude of different industries that we're working in, but for the crisis management piece, for the incident management piece, our history and pedigree is in oil and gas. So it was designed with that in mind, but the use cases we're now finding can drift across into multiple industries.
Really interesting opportunity for you.
It's grand. Yeah, we've got lots going on. We're very busy.
Not just system hopping, but sector hopping.
Indeed, so yeah.
Yes.
Sector, yeah.
And actually, what I'm getting here is something Christina said earlier: is digital at the heart of what you're doing. That gives you the knowledge, the insight, whatever the industry, whatever the sector, you can manage that and get the insights.
Yeah, and one of the other fellow panelists talked about is about the accuracy of data. That's the key piece. But then being able to, once that data is trusted, to then have a decision-making cycle where everybody is informed, you're increasing your situational awareness. It then just allows both the day-to-day operations, but more so than an incident or emergency, to reduce that decision-making cycle. And ultimately that saves lives, the improvements save lives.
I think the interesting thing about data generally is that everyone thinks, oh, it's data, I'm a bit scared of it. But the classic principles hold, good information in, good information out. It doesn't have to be technology, it just has to be information that you put up. We're just talking about it in a more contemporary way with machines that do a lot of clever usage and management of it. So the simple principles are much the same as they've always been, but actually it's the machines in between that do the clever work that give the outcomes faster, whether it's smart cities, whether it's the agricultural sector, water management, the principles remain the same. So I'm not sure there's anyone needs to be too concerned about data. It's just make sure you've got good information in the first place. Is that?
Yeah, and look, and make sure that it's a data exchange, it's have it readily available to those people who require. Look, at the moment, what we're seeing in Iraq is that it doesn't need to be this dark art. That information does exist. It's just about harmonizing it, integrating it, and then making it available to those people.
So overall, I'd like to thank all the panelists. We've been a terrific lot. I think this will be online before too long. But one of the big messages came to me is that data is the new oil. And I'd love to convey that to all IBBC members who not only can work in oil, but actually work in data at the same time. That data allows you to work smarter, more efficiently in any area. It allows you increased productivity. So really the key thing is get smart for all the benefits that it conveys. Particularly in agriculture, the productivity, I think we've heard from Shamal, could be quite extraordinary. And of course, I think one of the main challenges is getting government on board to understand that data needn't be scary, it needn't be expensive. Christina's shown us that you can have a small team doing a lot of work very quickly. And hopefully that's a great opportunity for Iraq to set up some small units in, say, universities, to work with the private sector, to drive data insights. And digitize Iraq in a much faster way. I'd particularly like to thank SAP and Sean O'Brien, who sponsored us for this particular forum, and everyone who's logged in and listened to us. And I hope we'll be hearing more about these topics in more detail in the future. So just logging off, 3 minutes behind schedule. Thank you, everybody, for sticking to the time. Thank you for everybody for listening. And if you really want to do, you can share the links with anybody that didn't make it or would find this of interest, and from the IBBC website. So thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.